Welcome back. In our previous recording, we talked through the issues of consulting related to contracting and getting agreement with a client. In this section, we're going to get deeper into diagnosing how problems are being managed within complex systems and organizations. Problems are created within a system structure. In this case, the system can be the organization at large. And we look for corrective actions to learn how it is that the system works. What are the mental models that exist within the system? How the teams learn and how they can improve on their team learning, and where the leverage is within the organization to make change. In this, we move from corrective actions away from events into more around uncovering their structures. And their structures at the very high level can be the business structures, the marketing position, their product strategy, distribution strategy, how they deal with customers. It could be their organizational structures, the management hierarchy, their budgeting process, their planning process, their reward systems, their cultural norms, their written rules, their information systems. There are interpersonal structures, the flexibility around roles and the relationship skills within the organization, how they go about making decisions and solving problems, and what are the unwritten rules. And then at the individual level, there are the mental models, is how do I personally think? How do I view myself? How do I view my role? What are my beliefs? What are my assumptions? And by understanding these different levels of structure, we can anticipate. And the more we understand, the more we can change. Identifying the structure will allow us to get some answers to how is this happening in our organization, or what are the forces that are creating this, and what are the paradigms or mindsets or mental models that are involved. Now, it's very valuable to create illustrations of what's going on, and I want to start with a basic differentiation between what's a process diagram and what's a systems thinking loop diagram. We've all seen process diagrams that says first this happens, then this happens, then this happens. Process diagrams do not represent causal relationships. They represent a flow or a set of activities or steps. The labels are verbs, tasks, steps. The arrows show sequencing. Pushing on an element doesn't necessarily have an impact on other elements, whereas in a systems thinking diagram, also called a causal loop diagram, these represent cause and effect relationships. The labels on the diagrams are variables, and pushing on any variable produces change in all variables in the loop. And the arrows indicate causality. Now, there are different types of systems thinking diagrams. These consist of variables and arrows. The arrows show the cause and effect relationships amongst the variables, or the feedback loop, or the causal loop is another term used here. And there are two types. There are reinforcing loops, and there are balancing loops. We'll get into those in a moment. So a variable is an element in a situation that may act or be acted upon. It is not an event. It is something you can discuss as the level of. Its value can vary up or down over time. It's a variable if you could make a time plot of it. Variable names should be nouns or noun phrases, not action words. They fit into a phrase starting with the level of, the number of, or the quantity of, such as the level of service quality, or the clarity of direction, or the commitment to a goal, the number of customer complaints, the pressure to sell. So let's start with a reinforcing loop. These are also referred to as snowball effects or amplification. They can be seen as virtuous cycles, which would show rapid growth, or they could be vicious cycles, which show rapid decline. A couple of examples here, simple ones: the Pygmalion effect. When a teacher's expectations go up, the student's performance goes up. When the student's performance goes up, the teacher's expectation rise even further. So that's an example of a virtuous cycle. It amplifies. Another one, market optimism. When optimism about the stock market goes up, stock market buying goes up. As the stock buying goes up, the stock prices go up. Higher stock prices increases optimism about the stock market, and so on. So again, a reinforcing loop. Then there's here's one called the pile-up within a team. So when there are too many things on a team's agenda, the team tends not to focus, which leads to a superficial treatment of the problems and results in a lack of thorough understanding by all of the people concerned. True consensus never really develops, so action and follow-through don't occur. Decisions that get made don't stay made, and the problems pile up, which means there are too many things on a team's agenda. So this would be an example of a vicious cycle. Now, a balancing loop is more self-regulating, limiting, self-controlling. It adjusts. So a quick, simple example here would be when we get hungry, we usually have to eat something. As the amount we eat reaches a certain point, the feeling of hunger goes down and we stop eating. Eventually, our hunger starts increasing again until we're hungry enough to get food. Once again, after we eat a certain amount, our hunger decreases. So this is, again, an example of a balancing loop. Another example, service quality. The balancing process described below applies to cash register lines at stores and supermarkets, to banks, gas stations, and even hospital emergency rooms. When the waiting time is short, customers perceive quality to be high and they return. Word about the high quality service gets around and the amount of customer traffic goes up. As customer traffic increases, waiting lines grow and the average waiting time goes up. With longer waiting times, customers conclude that service quality has declined. Current and prospective customers stop using that service and seek alternatives. Customer traffic decreases, waiting lines become short and disappear, waiting time declines, and the remaining customers once again believe that service quality has gone up, and the cycle begins again until a balance is achieved. So looking at these, you'll see that there are variables that affect each other in the same way, positive to positive, and there are some that in the opposite way, which would be positive to negative or negative to positive. So to identify a reinforcing loop, so the rules there would be that the story within the loop is about amplification. It's a vicious or a virtuous cycle, spiraling growth, spiraling decline. And the diagram contains either zero O's or an even number of O's. If it's a balancing, it's describing constraining, limiting, or self-regulating process. And the diagram in this case will contain an odd number of O's. Another really important part of a systems diagram is the concept of delays or time lags. So an action happens, a variable is affected, but its effect doesn't happen immediately. So a couple of quick examples here. The set point theory of weight control. This theory explains how a level of fat in our bodies controls our appetites. It is a balancing process. The theory goes like this. Our bodies have a target level of fat. When there is a gap between the target level and the actual amount, our appetites are stimulated. When we've taken in enough food and gained enough weight, so our actual fat level approaches the target level, our appetites diminish. Over time, the fat levels fluctuate but stay near the target level. So there is a gap between the appetite and the actual body fat. This is a great one, controlling the shower temperature. I know you're staying at the old apple tree guest house. You turn on the shower and the water is icy. You crank the handle a little further and suddenly your hand is nearly scalded. You hastily turn the faucet the other way and prepare to get into the shower. As you put your foot in, you realize the water is quite chilly. Shivering on the bath mat, you continue adjusting the water taps in search of a comfortable warm morning shower. Great example, because the water doesn't change temperature immediately on turning the faucet. So that would again be a delay between the variable and the influence of the variable. Sometimes these loops work together. You can have a reinforcing and balancing loop in a more complex system. So, for example, here's one around corporate alignment. The reinforcing loop says that high alignment within a company leads to improved organizational performance. As performance improves, motivation and satisfaction increase. These increases heighten employees' sense of ownership and alignment. Then there's a balancing loop near it where, however, as performance improves, the number of employees rises. With more new employees, the percentage of employees feeling fully aligned with the company decreases. The decrease reduces overall alignment, performance stops improving and could decline. So just a simple example about how these two different loops can work together. One more, I guess, a little more complicated. So let's talk this limits to quality improvement. Quickly, as Japanese companies takes a commanding lead in the auto, motorcycle, and consumer electronics and other industries, American companies have taken up total quality control, just-in-time supply, and statistical process control. However, in spite of years of concentrated effort, many of them find their improvement rates leveling off. The brutal truth is that they have hit their organization's limit on improvement given their current management and organizational structures. What they are discovering is that working hard on quality improvement has blinded them to more fundamental realization, like TQM, JIT, SPC, and all the other buzz terms are only pieces of a radically different way of doing business. Japanese companies are shifting from total in mass production to lean production. As companies make more quality improvements, they increase their use of JIT, TQC, etc., and initially their rate of quality improvement rises rapidly. However, eventually they hit the limits of the improvements that can be made in the mass production hierarchical structure. The number of improvement opportunities level off and possibly declines. So again, in this case, while the tactics were excellent and smart, there were structures within the organization that eventually balanced it off, and which made these strategies no longer productive. That's all I want to talk about in terms of this particular section. And what I'll do in the next section is dive into details about some of the patterns that play out in organizations on a consistent basis.